Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're dedicating our time to a topic that's really hitting hard, especially in financial services, the cyber threat landscape. It's just escalating like crazy.
It really is.
We've pulled together the latest info we could find to, really understand what's happening now, some surprising new tactics attackers are trying out, and what it all means, particularly if you're in finance or connected to it.
Yeah, what we're seeing isn't just more attacks. It's a real shift in how sophisticated they are and sometimes even why they're doing it.
That's a key point. For financial firms, the pressure is just incredibly high right now, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The attackers are, well, they're more skilled, they're definitely more persistent, and the attacks themselves, they're designed specifically to slip past the kinds of defenses that, honestly, were probably fine just a few years back.
It feels like a different ballgame entirely.
It really is a significant departure. Security teams are playing catch-up against a much faster, much trickier opponent.
And getting a handle on these threats, it's not just, interesting from a tech perspective. It really ties into the trust and stability of the whole financial system.
Couldn't agree more.
Which actually brings us neatly to our sponsor for this deep dive, Stonefly. They're leaders in areas like enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
All crucial areas right now.
Exactly. And in this kind of environment we're describing, where keeping your data safe and being able to recover it is everything. Well, secure, ransomware-proof storage isn't just nice to have, is it? It's essential.
Non-negotiable, really.
And Stonefly provides exactly that with their air-gapped and immutable storage solutions. So if you're thinking about strengthening your data defenses against the kind of stuff we're about to get into, you can contact them at sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.
Protecting that core asset, your data, has to be the foundation. If you can't get your data back, well, nothing else really matters, does it?
That's the bottom line. Okay, so our mission today. Let's really unpack the current state of play for threats against finance. We want to get past the headlines, look at the details of some really noteworthy recent attacks and trends, stuff that shows just how much the game has changed.
All right, let's do it. Where should we start? Maybe with the fundamental point.
Yeah, let's ground ourselves there. Financial services, still the #1 target globally.
Still number one, year after year. It just reflects where the value is, right? Sensitive data, high-value transactions. It's where the attackers focus.
And the intensity, it just seems to be cranking up. Looking at the 2024 numbers, pretty stark. We saw, what, a 27% year-over-year jump in attacks just on financial institutions?
That's right, a huge increase. And the sheer volume within those attacks is, frankly, staggering. Think about an average of nearly 13,000 DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service, per institution.
13,000 each. That's not like a once-a-year thing. That's
No.
constant pressure.
It's like a near-perpetual digital siege. And crucially, the nature of these attacks is evolving. They're not just simple floods trying to clog the pipes anymore.
More sophisticated, you mean?
Much more. We're seeing these multi-vector campaigns, increasingly complex, designed specifically to get around traditional security, the signature-based stuff.
Give me an example of that complexity.
Okay, well, look at web DDoS attacks. More than 1 in 4 of those seen in this period hit over 100,000 requests per second.
Wow.
But
100,000 requests hitting you every single second. That's aimed right at critical things like online banking or payment platforms, I assume.
exactly. Trying to overwhelm them, make them unavailable for legitimate customers. And that level of noise, 100,000 RPS, it makes it incredibly hard to spot anything else that might be going on, like a more stealthy intrusion attempt hidden in the chaos.
Yeah, finding a needle in a hurricane, almost.
Precisely. And adding another layer to this complexity is this massive surge we've seen in DNS query floods.
DNS query floods. I could break that down. How's that different?
So it's a specific type of application layer denial of service attack. And globally, this specific attack type jumped by over 272%. Financial firms, they're getting hit disproportionately hard by this one.
272%.
Wow, why are these DNS floods particularly nasty?
Well, they target the domain name system, DNS, which is basically the internet's phone book, right? You type yourbank.com, your computer asks DNS for the IP address.
Got it.
A DNS query flood just swamps those essential DNS servers with bogus lookup requests. Unlike some network floods that just throw traffic at your main connection, these target a service that everything else depends on.
So it breaks the ability to even find a bank online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're sneaky because the malicious requests can look a lot like legitimate ones, especially if they mix it in with those high-volume web DDoS attacks we just talked about. It's like jamming the phone lines while also shouting really loudly outside the building. creates chaos by hitting a foundational piece of infrastructure. Okay, so globally, things are getting louder, more complex, sneakier. Does it look the same everywhere, or are we seeing regional variations in this pressure cooker?
It's definitely global pressure, but yeah, the attack patterns do show some regional flavors. They all point to things getting more intense, though.
Like where?
Okay, take North America. The average DDoS attack volume per financial institution, up 17%. And some firms there faced over 300,000 separate attack events during the year.
300,000.
And the peaks, the biggest individual attacks clocked in at 1.125 terabits per second, TBPS.
A terabit per second. It's hard to even picture that amount of malicious traffic, like thousands of HD movies streaming at once, all aimed at one target.
It's an unimaginable flood. Just a brute force attempt to knock them completely offline. Now, jump over to EMEA, Europe, the Middle East, Africa. They saw really dramatic increases in specific attack types.
Like the DNS floods.
Exactly. DNS flood activity alone jumped 293% there. Really highlights that shift towards attacking the application layer. And the overall volume of DDoS traffic they had to mitigate, up 177%. So they're feeling that targeted pressure intensely.
And I remember the APAC numbers were kind of eye-watering.
They were almost unbelievable. Asia Pacific reported a 9,000% increase in the average attack volume per institution.
Yeah, 1,000%.
9,000. And the number of malicious packets spiked over 4,000%. Now, okay, the baseline volume might have started lower than North America or EMEA, but that rate of increase, it's absolutely staggering. Shows incredibly rapid targeting of the financial sector across APAC.
So it's not just the usual suspects getting hit harder, it's escalating everywhere. What about Latin America?
Also seeing growing volumes, peak attacks reaching over 225 gigabits per second. Still a huge amount, easily capable of causing major disruption. So, yeah, it's definitely a global issue.
Not confined to just London or New York or Hong Kong, it's everywhere.
Absolutely critical takeaway. The bad actors are global, they adapt their tactics. And there's another layer here, changing the why behind some attacks. The rise of hacktivism, ideologically driven attacks.
Right, so not just about stealing money, but making a statement. Political, social aims.
Precisely. In 2024, we saw over 15,000 DDoS attacks hitting financial institutions that were attributed to hacktivists. That's up 20% from the year before.
15,000 attacks with an ideological motive.
Yeah. The goal shifts. It's about disruption, embarrassment, making a point against an institution they see as representing something they oppose, a government, a system.
Are these just lone wolves or are they working together?
Increasingly coordinated. They often use platforms like Telegram to share targets, time attacks, distribute simple tools or scripts, and then, crucially, amplify their claims afterwards for maximum visibility.
So they're getting organized, which makes them more effective, I suppose.
Definitely more effective, more persistent, so you've got volume up, sophistication up, coordination up, and now more mixed motives. What about the how? Are they just throwing more data, or are the actual techniques changing?
That's the key question, isn't it? It's definitely not just more volume. It's complexity and trying to blend in. Look at the stat. The number of distinct vectors used in a single DDoS attack, that rose by nearly 40% in 2024.
Meaning they're using more different types of attacks simultaneously?
Exactly. Some sophisticated attacks were seen using up to 69 different vectors at the same time in one event. 69. That's not defending against one wave. That's like a meteorological nightmare. Lightning, hail, hurricane winds, all hitting you at once from different directions.
Perfect analogy. They combine the big network layer floods, overwhelming bandwidth, with those application layer methods like the DNS and HTTP attacks hitting specific services, maybe even throwing in some protocol attacks. It creates these multidimensional assaults.
Which must be exponentially harder to block than just one type of attack.
Absolutely. Your defenses have to spot, filter, and respond to all of them, all at once, in real time. It's a massive challenge.
Okay, so wrapping up this sort of threat landscape overview, what's the big takeaway for financial firms? It sounds like the old security playbook might not be enough anymore.
It definitely isn't. The threat environment has fundamentally shifted. Attacks are more persistent, they're more distributed, they're way more disruptive. And the risks, they go way beyond just being offline for a bit.
You mean data loss, fines?
Exactly. Significant data loss leading to huge regulatory fines, legal trouble, and maybe worst of all, long-term damage to the brand. Customer trust is everything in finance, and these attacks can shatter it. Plus, the potential for systemic impact if they hit core infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's scary.
And the cost of not being ready for this new reality, it's not theoretical. It's very real, very high, and we're seeing it everywhere.
We are.
Yeah.
It just highlights how critical it is for financial institutions, frankly, anyone holding sensitive data, to have adaptive real-time defenses.
Hmm.
You need systems that can handle these multi-vector threats, spot anomalies at the application level, not just the network level, and scale up massively when needed.
Because inaction is visibly costly now.
Very visibly, across all regions.
Okay, that's a really clear, if slightly terrifying picture of the broad pressures. Let's maybe zoom in now. To really get a feel for how tactics are evolving and blurring lines, you mentioned a specific recent incident, the Fog ransomware one.
Ah, yes, fog. This is where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unnerving. We're talking about an attack in May 2025 against a financial institution in Asia.
I remember hearing buzz about this. What made the Fog attack so different? Why did it catch everyone's attention?
It was the toolkit, just
Yeah.
an incredibly unusual, frankly bizarre mix of legitimate, off-the-shelf commercial software combined with several open-source penetration testing tools, all used together in the attack chain.
Wait, legitimate software? You mean like normal business tools?
Exactly. One of the key things they deployed was Citeka. It used to be called Ekran. It's sold as legitimate employee monitoring software.
Employee monitoring software, like screen recording, key logging.
That's exactly what it's designed for.
Yeah.
Screen recording, keystroke monitoring, tracking user activity.
Okay, hold on. Why on earth would a ransomware attacker deploy employee monitoring software? Their usual goal is just encrypt and extort, right?
And that is the aha moment. That's the piece that makes this stand out. The theory, based on the analysis, is that putting something like Citeka inside the ransomware attack chain points to another goal. Maybe even the main goal: stealing information, outright spying.
Spying as part of a ransomware attack.
Highly unusual, right? To have that kind of objective integrated into what looks like a standard criminal ransomware play. And later on, they were even seen running commands that looked like they were trying to clean up, remove evidence of Citeka being there, suggest they knew it was an odd tool to find.
So espionage disguised as or combined with ransomware, that's sophisticated masking. What about the open source tools? You said there were several.
Yeah, some noteworthy ones. One was called GC2. Now, this tool is unusual. It's designed to run commands on victim machines using Google Sheets or Microsoft SharePoint lists as the command and control channel.
Using Google Sheets for CNC? Seriously?
Seriously. And it can exfiltrate data by uploading it to Google Drive or SharePoint documents.
Wow. That's clearly designed to blend right in with normal cloud collaboration traffic, isn't it? Most places use Google or Microsoft 365 heavily.
Absolutely. Traffic to those services is usually trusted, whitelisted. Using them for CNC makes detection incredibly difficult for traditional security tools looking for connections to weird domains or IPs. And here's another wrinkle.
Go on.
The analysis notes that GC2 has been seen before, specifically used by the Chinese state-sponsored group known as APT41 back in 2023.
Okay, so a tool previously linked to state-sponsored espionage shows up in this ransomware attack.
Exactly. Now, crucially, the analysis didn't make a definitive attribution for this Fog attack. But seeing a tool with that kind of pedigree raises serious questions about who might be behind this, or at least who they're getting their tools from.
So the tool itself carries a potential state signature, even if the actors aren't necessarily state-sponsored themselves in this case.
Interesting. What were they doing with GC2 once they got it running?
Pretty standard recon stuff, actually. Commands like WAMI to see who they were logged in as, netuse and ipconfig, all to map out the network, find resources. They also ran netstat, take onup, find st 3389.
Checking for RDP connections, port 3389, looking for ways to move laterally.
Precisely. And the GC2 tool itself had commands built in like exit load, which could execute arbitrary files as shellcode plus upload and download. So a fully functional CNC channel for complex operations hidden inside legitimate cloud traffic.
What other open source tools were in the mix?
They used one called Stowaway, described as an open source proxy tool. In this case, it was used specifically to deliver the Citeka executable, the spying software. So they even proxied the delivery of the monitoring tool.
Okay.
And they deployed something called the AdaptX C2 Agent Beacon. This is part of an open source post-exploitation framework. Think of it like an open source equivalent to Cobalt Strike. It gives the attackers persistent CNC access, a foothold on the compromised machines.
Right, maintaining access. Did they use anything else, maybe more common tools?
Oh, yeah. They definitely used living off-the-land techniques. Things like PAZEC and SMBGEC were used alongside Citeka and GC2 to move around the network.
Those are legitimate admin tools, often already on systems.
Exactly why attackers use them. They blend in, often trusted by security monitoring. Much harder to spot than custom malware doing the same job.
So Using the victim's own environment against them, what about getting data out, assuming that spying theory holds water?
For exfiltration, they downloaded and used legit file transfer tools like Free File Sync and Megasync. Also used 7-Zip, the compression tool presumably archiving data before moving it. And then on the day they actually deployed the ransomware, it looks like they used the Impacket SMB tool. Impacket. That's a Python library for network protocols, used for executing the ransomware across the network, maybe.
That seems the most likely use, yeah. Kicking off the encryption remotely via SMB.
Okay, but you also mentioned persistence after the ransomware was deployed. That seems really weird for a typical ransom attack.
Yeah.
Usually they encrypt, demand cache, and maybe leave, right?
It is highly unusual. The analysis noted they used something called a process watchdog tool. It was set up specifically to keep checking if the GC2 process, that stealthy CNC tool, was running, and restarted if it stopped.
So even after encrypting files and making demands, they wanted to make sure they kept that backdoor open.
Clearly, a strong desire to maintain persistent access and control, even post-ransomware. Most ransomware attackers are gone once the encryption's done and the data is stolen. This persistence is another key piece pointing towards that potential espionage angle.
And they weren't quick about it either, were they? The dwell time.
No, definitely not a smash and grab. That's another significant point. They were inside the network, active, for about 2 weeks before they deployed the ransomware.
2 weeks. Plenty of time to look around, find valuable data, exfiltrate it quietly, set up all these persistence mechanisms.
Exactly. Thorough reconnaissance, mapping, identifying targets, getting data out, setting up GC2 with its watchdog. It's a far cry from the noisy, quick hits you see from some ransomware affiliates.
Okay, so let's put all those fog pieces together. The legit monitoring software, Cytica, the open source tools with state links, DC2 APT41, the long dwell time, living off the land, and especially that weird post-ransomware persistence. It does seem to build a strong case for that core hypothesis.
It really does. The highly unusual toolkit, the effort to stay in after the encryption. It strongly suggests, as the analysis theorized, that the main target might have been intelligence gathering, espionage. The ransomware, maybe it was a sophisticated decoy to distract the defenders, or maybe just an extra way to monetize the intrusion once the spying was done.
And the presence of tools like GC2, even without direct attribution, adds weight to that state-linked possibility.
It definitely lends weight to the theory, yes. But again, important caveat. The analysis didn't definitively say this was APT41, just that the tool was previously associated with them. It really blurs those lines between crime and espionage.
Has Fog ransomware done stuff like this before? Or is this financial institution attack a complete one-off?
Well, Fog itself is relatively new, first documented publicly around May 2024. Initially, they hit U.S. educational institutions, often getting in via compromised VPNs.
Okay, standard entry point.
Then later in 2024, around October, they were seen exploiting a critical bug in Veeam backup and replication servers, CVE 2024-40711, as their way in.
So shifting from VPNs to exploiting specific software vulnerabilities, adapting.
Right. And then just before this incident, in April 2025, there was a campaign using phishing emails. But the ransom notes were odd. Mocking, referencing internet memes like DOGE, and even offering a bizarre decrypt for free option if the victim infected someone else.
Wow, that's quite a range. VPNs, vulns, weird phishing notes, now potentially espionage. They seem pretty adaptable.
Shows how quickly these groups evolve. And this latest attack on the financial firm, while unique in its suspected motive, really taps into a broader trend we're seeing everywhere now.
Which is?
The increasing use of legitimate commercial software or readily available open source tools precisely because they help attackers blend in and evade detection.
Because security tools often trust these known applications, right? Harder to spot the malicious needle if it looks just like all the other legitimate haystacks.
Exactly. Why use custom malware that might get flagged quickly if you can achieve your goals using tools defenders might ignore? It lets attackers focus more on getting that initial access, phishing, exploiting bugs, stealing credentials, and then move around using stuff that looks normal, especially if monitoring or privilege controls aren't tight enough.
Okay, Fog is a fascinating, if worrying, case study in how ransomware and maybe even espionage are evolving, becoming chameleons. Let's broaden out again. What's the bigger picture for ransomware hitting finance today, and how does this overlap with those state-linked actors you mentioned?
Yeah, building on Fog, ransomware in general is still a massive, evolving headache for finance. Beyond just more attacks, there are several major trends making it worse.
Double extortion seems pretty standard now, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's the default playbook for most serious groups. They don't just encrypt your files anymore. First, they steal copies of your sensitive data. Then they encrypt.
So they hit you twice.
Exactly. They threaten to publish your stolen data online or sell it if you don't pay.
Huh.
This piles on immense pressure. Suddenly, it's not just about getting systems back online. It's about massive reputational damage, huge regulatory fines for the data breach, lawsuits.
So even if you have perfect backups and can restore quickly, you're still facing a nightmare scenario with the data leak threat.
Precisely. Availability is only half the problem. Confidentiality is the other shoe dropping. Then you've got ransomware as a service, Reyes, fueling the whole thing.
That's the model where developers lease out the ransomware tools.
Right. Developers create the malware and infrastructure, then affiliates rent it to carry out attacks, splitting the profits. It massively lowers the technical bar. You don't need to be a coding genius anymore.
Democratizes ransomware, basically. Makes it easier for more criminals to get involved.
And harder to track the original authors. We've seen recent active Reyes groups mentioned, like Quilin and Arcus Media, causing trouble. And sometimes those lines blur even more.
How so?
Well, the material noted that Quilin Reyes was actually used in some attacks by Moonstone Sleet, a North Korean thread group. Shows how tools from the criminal underground can get picked up by state actors, maybe to create noise or hide their tracks. We're also seeing new groups pop up, like IMN Crew, focused just on data extortion, stealing data, and threatening leaks without even bothering to encrypt sometimes. They often hit smaller businesses by exploiting vulnerable external services.
Which just hammers home how vital patching those internet-facing systems is, no matter your size.
Definitely. Another really worrying trend, especially for finance, is attackers aiming directly at critical financial infrastructure.
You mean like payment systems, trading platforms?
Exactly. Payment networks, trading exchanges, interbank communication systems, clearinghouses, the core plumbing of the financial system.
An attack there wouldn't just hit one bank. It could ripple outwards, cause systemic chaos, impact whole economies.
It's a very real, very alarming risk. Keeps regulators awake at night. And supply chain attacks are still a major vector, too.
Attacking a supplier to get to their customers.
Right. Compromise a software vendor, a service provider that works with lots of financial firms. Hit one target, gain access to many downstream. The material mentioned a group called Carterby using legitimate software Cobra.guard in supply chain attacks in Asia. Again, using trusted tools maliciously.
And what about AI? We hear so much about it. Is it making attacks worse yet?
It's definitely an emerging trend to watch closely. Maybe not fully autonomous AI hackers yet, but AI is being used to enhance attacks, crafting much more convincing phishing emails, automating vulnerability discovery, creating more evasive malware, analyzing stolen data faster.
So making attacks potentially more targeted, faster, harder to spot.
That's the concern, especially for defenses relying on known patterns. AI could help generate novel attacks that bypass existing signatures.
So the ransomware scene, more complex, double extortion is standard, Reyes makes it easy, critical infrastructure is a target, supply chains are weak points, and AI is starting to turbocharge things. Grim picture.
It is. And then you overlay the activities of state-linked espionage actors onto all of this.
Who have different goals, usually, not just money.
Right. These groups, often linked to countries like China in the intel we reviewed, operate with different resources, different scale, different aims, long-term economic espionage, stealing intellectual property, gaining geopolitical leverage, maybe even pre-positioning for future disruptive attacks on critical infrastructure. They're a relentless force.
And notoriously hard to pin down, right?
Yeah.
That whole attribution problem.
Yes, it's a massive challenge. You might strongly suspect a country based on who's being targeted, or the TTPs, but saying it was definitively Group X from that country. Often very difficult.
Why is that?
Because they share tools. Think well-known backdoors like PlugX and ShadowPad. They might share network infrastructure. Maybe even personnel or contractors overlap. So recent campaigns often show fingerprints from multiple known groups, blurring the lines.
It's like trying to figure out which specific army unit did something when they all wear similar uniforms and use standard gear.
That's a great analogy. The overlap in their tactics, techniques, and procedures TTPs is huge. We see tons of DLL sideloading and living off the land.
We talked about living off the land using legit tools. What's DLL sideloading again?
That's where you trick a legitimate program into loading a malicious DLL file instead of the real one it needs. Great for persistence and evasion. Groups like Budworm or actors using ShadowPad love these techniques. There was a wave mentioned targeting Asian governments that used all sorts of different legit software for sideloading malware.
Just like Fog using Satika, potentially, but maybe for pure spying this time.
Exactly. Shows it's a common playbook for sophisticated groups, regardless of motive. And some state groups are laser-focused on critical infrastructure. Dung beetle targeting U.S. utilities, telecom. Red fly hitting critical infrastructure in Asia, India.
So using legit tools, hitting critical systems, these are characteristics across different advanced adversaries.
Absolutely. Beyond Fox ITICA, you see groups like Sheathminer using cloud services, GitHub, Dropbox, even LiveJournal for CNC and hosting malware. Billbug using tools like Zrock, a peer-to-peer tunneling tool, or even simple things like Date Changer to potentially hide their tracks by messing with file timestamps. And the infection chains themselves are getting more complex. Groups like FireAm use custom modular malware, sometimes with self-propagating worms. PureRat, which we touched on, is malware as a service.
Right, the data stealer.
Yeah, it uses a multi-stage loader called PureCryptor and an advanced stealer module, PureLogs. Very potent for grabbing sensitive data once they're in.
It really sounds like these adversaries are incredibly adaptable, patient, well-resourced, and constantly shifting tactics to stay ahead. Any other specific malware trends worth flagging from recent analysis?
A couple more stood out. RedFox, relatively new Windows ransomware, but mainly acting as a data leak threat. Notable for evasion tactics, like using WMI calls and long sleep delays to avoid detection. PureRat, as we said, really highlights that MAS trend focused on data theft via plugins and complex infections. And unfortunately, showing how threats spread, the entire source code for the Van Helsing ransomware was leaked recently.
Leaked source code, that just puts powerful tools in the hands of less skilled attackers, doesn't it?
Exactly, lowers the bar again. And Van Helsing targets Windows, Linux, and even VMware ESXi, the virtualization platform used everywhere, so a broad risk.
So yeah, the landscape is messy. Criminals acting like spies, maybe spies acting like criminals, shared tools, constant evolution, a nightmare to defend against, especially if you're a high-value target like a bank.
Given all this, the volume, the sophistication, the stealth, the mixed motives, the state actors, it's just undeniable.
Right.
Robust, adaptive defenses aren't optional anymore. They're existential, especially for finance.
Okay, let's pivot then. Let's talk about building those defenses. Based on everything we've discussed, what are the absolute key prevention strategies organizations need to focus on?
It has to start with prevention, building that strong, multi-layered security posture. That means the basics done right. Firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDPS, good anti-malware, strong email and web filtering to catch those initial phishes and malicious links.
Table stakes, really.
Pretty much. But crucially, beyond the perimeter, you need comprehensive network segmentation. Internal firewalls, essentially. If one part gets breached, you limit the blast radius. And alongside that, rigorously enforce the principle of least privilege.
Meaning people and systems only get access to exactly what they need to function and nothing more.
Precisely. Minimizes damage if an account or system is compromised. Don't give everyone the keys to the whole kingdom, and you absolutely cannot ignore the human element.
Training, right. Phishing awareness.
Comprehensive and ongoing training. Social engineering is getting incredibly slick. Staff need to recognize phishing, understand the dangers of dodgy links or attachments, be wary of unexpected requests for info, use strong, unique passwords, enable MFA everywhere possible. Basic security hygiene is vital. Human error is still such a common way in. And then there's vulnerability management, non-negotiable. Regularly scan everything for known weaknesses and, critically, have a solid process to promptly apply security patches. Close those known doors before attackers walk through them. Plus, regular penetration testing.
Hiring ethical hackers to find the holes before the bad guys do. Stress testing your defenses.
Exactly. Find your weaknesses yourself. And because, look, 100% prevention against these kinds of adversaries just isn't realistic. You must have a well-defined, documented, and this is key-tested incident response plan.
The plan for when things go wrong.
Vital for minimizing impact. It needs clear roles, communication lines, containment steps, recovery procedures, post-incident analysis, everything spelled out. And you have to test it regularly. Tabletop exercises, simulations. Don't wait for a real crisis to discover your plan has holes or people don't know what to do.
Because a plan on paper is useless if it crumbles under pressure.
Absolutely. And finally, leverage threat intelligence. Stay informed about the latest trends, TTPs, indicators of compromise, IOCs. Knowing what attackers are doing right now helps you tune your defenses and spot suspicious activity faster.
Okay, solid prevention advice. But what about mitigation? If an attack does get through, what are the immediate steps?
If an attack hits, especially ransomware, step one is immediate isolation. Identify infected systems and cut them off from the network. Stop the bleeding. Prevent lateral spread.
Containment first.
Right. Then prompt notification. Internal stakeholders, yes, but also often legally required notifications to law enforcement, FBI, etc., and regulators. Especially in finance, reporting requirements are strict. Plus, law enforcement needs that intel. Now, the ransom demand. The strong recommendation from experts in law enforcement is don't pay. There's no guarantee you'll get working keys, and you're directly funding crime, encouraging more attacks. It's a tough business call in a crisis, I know, but the guidance is clear.
So the focus should be on recovery from backups.
That's the most reliable path without paying. Which, of course, brings us back to how critical those backups are. If they're gone or unusable, your options narrow drastically.
Assume you get through containment and recovery. What next?
Thorough post-incident analysis. You have to learn from it. How did they get in? What failed? What data was touched? How effective were our responses? Use those lessons to harden defenses and improve the IR plan for next time.
Are there any specific mitigation tips particularly relevant to these trickier attacks, like fog, using legit tools, or the state-linked stuff?
Yes, the analysis did pull out some specifics for these modern tactics. Given the use of dual-use tools like PSEZEC, you need to monitor the use of those legit tools. Look for anomalies, unauthorized use. Secure RDP access, still a common way in with multi-factor authentication, MFA. Rigorously audit your admin accounts. Consider application allow listing only approved software can run. Makes it way harder for attackers to deploy any tool, legit or not.
Harden PowerShell, make credential theft harder.
Exactly. Enable things like Credential Guard in Windows. Implement MFA broadly, not just for VPN, but for critical internal services too. Limits the value of stolen passwords. Have a clear pre-practice plan for external notification, who to call, what to say, and a really practical one. Prepare a physical jump bag.
A jump bag, like for emergencies.
Yeah. Hard copies of network diagrams, emergency contacts, crucial passwords for break glass accounts, copies of the IR plan, stuff you absolutely need if your main systems are down or encrypted. Simple, but potential life-saving in a crisis.
That jump bag idea is smart. Low tech, high value when digital fails. And running through all this defense, recovery, mitigation, it just keeps coming back to the data, doesn't it? Secure backups.
It's the ultimate safety net. The advice strongly reinforces needing off-site backups, yes, but even more critical, offline or air-gapped backups.
Physically disconnected.
Physically or logically disconnected. So ransomware sweeping the network literally cannot reach them to encrypt them.
Yeah.
And you have to regularly test those backups, verify the data is good, practice restores, and critically, lock down permissions on the backup systems themselves. Attackers often try to delete backups first.
Because, like you said, a backup you can't restore is just data you used to have. Implementing all this, especially the data security part, needs serious, robust infrastructure.
It's an absolute requirement today. No way around it.
And that links right back to our sponsor. Protecting data in this mess requires reliable, secure foundations. This deep dive was sponsored by Stonefly. They're leaders in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions.
Covering all the key bases.
Exactly. So if you're looking for storage that's genuinely ransomware-proof, designed for these kinds of threats, Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable storage. You can contact them sales at stonefly.com to schedule a demo. See how they can help lock down that critical data asset.
It's a necessary investment in just staying in business, frankly. In resilience.
It really is. Okay, so let's try and wrap this deep dive up. The big picture. The financial sector, and likely others soon, are facing constant, intense, evolving threats. We're seeing attacks using truly surprising tactics, like fog-blurring crime and espionage with legit tools. We see persistent state actors sharing TTPs, making things incredibly complex.
It just hammers home that organizations need a proactive, multi-layered strategy. It's not just about prevention anymore. It's detection, response, and absolutely guaranteed recovery capability.
And that recovery pace, as we've hit on again and again, hinges completely on having secure, tested, untouchable data storage and backups.
Absolutely fundamental for survival.
So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on after all this. In a world where attackers are becoming masters of disguise, using everyday tools to blend in, maybe pursuing multiple goals at once, spying and stealing money, what does true digital resilience actually look like? Beyond just stopping the first step, how can organizations be sure their critical data is not just theoretically safe, but demonstrably recoverable, even when the attacker is already inside, trying to burn that last lifeline?
That's the question everyone needs to keep asking themselves.
Yeah.
And investing in the answer.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into a pretty challenging cyber landscape. We hope it's given you a clearer view of the threats and the crucial steps needed to face them.